This episode is brought to you by the Evolve Artist Program. The Evolve Artist Program is a breakthrough training system designed to take inexperienced and amateur artists to confident, realistic artists, creating professional-grade work in just 1 year or less. If you've struggled with tutorials that are incomplete, that leave you hanging when you hit roadblocks, and leave your questions unanswered, Evolve is for you. If you're considering art school but don't want to go into debt to do so, Evolve is for you. Or if you went to art school but it let you down with inconsistent methods, Evolve is for you. All of your supplies are included. Premium oil paint is supplied by Old Holland, and all materials, including brushes, canvases, and photo references, are delivered right to your door anywhere in the world. Evolve is a complete A to Z system, including daily feedback on your assignments 365 days a year, live calls with working professional artists, and a supportive and friendly community of like-minded students. This is the shortest, clearest path to guaranteed results and the only place that gives you the method, the materials, and the community. Discover how far you can push your skills further than you would at art school and for a minor fraction of the time and cost. Yes, it's real. For full details and for an exclusive 10% discount for YCP listeners, head to yourcreativepush.com/evolve. Your Creative Push, episode 356.
The number of things you need to know to be able to make extraordinary art. That information fits in the palm of your hand, if it's given to you in a concise manner.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Kevin Murphy. Kevin is an internationally recognized, award-winning portrait painter and illustrator. Since 1993, he's delivered nearly 600 commissioned works within the fields of illustration and portraiture, and he is also the co-founder of the Evolve Artist Program. And Kevin comes on the show today to talk about his early education and the mark that it left with him, and how he burned the ships of his construction career to create science fiction fantasy book covers. Kevin talks about working with LucasArts, National Geographic, and the Rolling Stones, how he got into portraiture, and why he opened his school. And then Kevin goes deep into the Evolve Artist Program, shares an overview of it, where it got its name, how it works, how you get all of the materials, and why using quality paints like Old Hollands are so helpful, and a deeper look into the methodology of Evolve Artist. We also talk about the community and how student groups add to that feeling that even though you're alone in your own home doing the assignments, you're never really alone in the Evolve Artist Program. And finally, he shares the way in which Evolve hones in on your fundamentals, shows you exactly what you're doing right, exactly what you're doing wrong, and a very compelling answer to why traditional art schools are going to let you down. If this episode doesn't have you ready to join Evolve, I don't know what will. Kevin has created something amazing with this program, and this conversation really highlights how much he cares about it, how much he cares about his students, and how much he will care about you. So please enjoy my conversation with the man, the myth, the legend, Kevin Murphy. Kevin, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Of course. I've been really looking forward to this interview because in terms of me believing in something enough to promote it to my listeners, it's been a 4-year journey now. I haven't found something that I actually feel like people can sink their teeth into, and the fact that Evolve guarantees results is something that I think gives me and my listeners definitely a sigh of relief. That's not something that you hear a lot. So anyway, all that being said, I'm very excited to have you on and to talk about your journey and also Evolve Artist Program.
So what can I answer for you? What can I do to basically explain to your listeners, where I come from and what I do and what it is that Evolve is and how it might benefit them.
Yeah, I think like a really good spot to start, because I think it will really set the stage for what Evolve does and what you do, is to sort of tell us how it all started for you in illustration. I know that, and portraiture and painting, because I know that you had a sort of back and forth relationship with your personal education experience. So maybe we could start with that. Go back to school for us.
Okay, well, so I'll give a kind of abbreviated version of this because it's a bit of a sprawling story.
Hmm.
But I was never a very good student in school. I barely graduated high school. 65 is a passing grade, and I graduated high school with a 68 average. I was the poster child for underachievers. And it wasn't that I couldn't do the work, but I had no interest in it. I couldn't see its value in the real world, and because of that, I just couldn't drum up the energy to take it all in and do the work to learn it. It just didn't make sense to me. Like I looked at things like algebra, and I used to joke around that you're never going to go into a store and buy a candy bar for 3x plus b. And so, what was the point of it? And there were things that I was interested in, but I wasn't able to access them. And even in English, you go, like I can say that I have a ravenous appetite for information, and I love reading. But when I was in high school, or I mean, my entire time through school, it was always one terrible, terrible story after another that we had to read that had no value in my life, at least as I saw it at the time. And we were forced to choke down these awful books where if they had given us books that might have been more, or given us the latitude to pick books that were more interesting to us, I might have developed a love for reading very early in life. And that wasn't the case. And so for me, I graduated high school and I could barely read. And you understand, I kind of frame it. I grew up in the Bronx, New York. I grew up very poor, so very limited in the way of resources. I graduated high school and I could barely read. And I didn't have much in the way of prospects, so I had an opportunity to get into the Carpenters Union, and I worked construction for 3 years. And along that time, I'd get on the train back and forth to the city every day, down to Manhattan, and I'd spend an hour and a half sometimes on the train sitting there at 5:30 in the morning looking at homeless people. So that was all there was. There was no technology back then, so I didn't really read. And so I got bored with that very quickly. And I asked a few friends of mine who were avid readers if they could recommend a few books that even somebody who hated reading would enjoy. And I started reading. And it was all science fiction and fantasy. I fell in love with the artwork. There's a lot more to that, but I fell in love with the artwork on the covers. And then one day, about 3 years into my construction career, I went into work and it was bitter cold and pitch black out in the morning. I just thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I like the work. I enjoy doing construction. I like working with my hands. But I couldn't see myself going out in the cold every morning for the rest of my life. And I couldn't see myself getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work. I'm not a morning person.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I decided that I was going to do science fiction book covers, that's what I wanted to do. And since I was going to leave a very good paying job relative to what I had grown up with my family earning, since I was going to leave a job that was financially a really good move for me, I had to get into something that I wanted to do out of love. And so I decided science fiction fantasy book covers. And I went to work that morning. I gave all my tools away to one of the apprentices there so that I wouldn't go back. I basically burned the ships. And I decided I was going to be a painter. I kind of bounced around a little bit. I eventually went to the School of Visual Arts for 1 semester. The School of Visual Arts in Manhattan was at the time the top illustration school in the world. And so I went there for 1 semester, and what a waste of time that was. And again, it's not that nobody could get the education there, but I certainly wasn't going to. I ran into too many things and I didn't know how to get around them. Lousy teachers and all kinds of other stuff like that. And I just decided it wasn't a place I was going to get the education that I wanted. And so I went out on my own a little bit. And then eventually I tracked down another young artist who was already working professionally. His name was Dorian Vallejo. He's the son of very famous science fiction and fantasy illustrator Boris. And Dorian was kind enough to let me come out to his house, and he showed me around. He showed me how the stuff was done. And about a year later, I took that information and I worked myself to a nub, 15, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it took about a year's time, and I went from where I was when I met Dorian all the way to my first book cover commission. And my career took off from there. I spent the next 8 or 9 years doing book covers and all kinds of other illustration. If you name it, from an illustration standpoint, I painted it. And I did work, some of my clients on National Geographic. I did work for packaging work for LucasArts, Star Wars, Jurassic Park.
Oh, I know it well.
Religious greeting cards and all of that. And then really like the big one for me, the one that everybody knows. And it's not that they necessarily know the image, but you know the client. Mm-hmm. I did a cover for the Rolling Stones for one of their albums. And they hung an 85-foot banner of that painting, the size of an 8-story building off the Brooklyn Bridge when they were here in New York announcing the tour.
That's crazy.
And that's really like, you have 300 published works, but that one makes you famous. That one puts you on the map. And at that point, I decided I didn't really want to do illustration anymore. I was really burned out. And so at a point where I probably could have pulled in any job I wanted, I walked away from it. I took off 2 years and I just kind of coasted along. I needed a break. I eventually started painting again. I did a few it took me 2 years. I didn't pick up a paintbrush at all. And then I missed it so much. I started painting again and I did some large figure paintings just for myself to kind of break free of the rust. And I kept getting calls from people about doing portrait work. And I turned them away. You're painting monsters and dragons and explosions, painting some mundane portrait. Just right. Like you can't even imagine how that would be of any interest. Somebody says, I'd like to have a portrait of my child. And you're like, well, can I put 3 monsters and an explosion in the background to make it interesting? Right? Because your child I have no interest in painting your child sitting on a couch. Right? And kind of that was my mindset. And I turned people away all the time. And I mean, those things came to, people requested that stuff from me because I always painted in all of my illustration work that were figures. And so eventually an author that I had done a series of book covers for over the expanse of my career reached out to me. It was his and his wife's, I think it was their 50th wedding anniversary. And he asked me if I would do a portrait. He wanted to have a portrait done. And I said, well, of course, I had a very good relationship with him. And so I did the portrait. And back then, no cell phones. There was just, you had your phone at home and an answering machine. And so I did the portrait and I delivered it for their anniversary party. They had a big party with a ton of friends. And by the time I got home, I had 3 or 4 messages on my answering machine of people who were there that saw the portrait that wanted to commission one. And so I returned the calls and I said, well, the first person, I said, yeah, I'll do the portrait. That would be fine. I had a great time on the one I worked on. And so I said, yeah, I'll do your portrait for you. And the second and the third and the fourth in the queue, my response was, well, I'm not a portrait painter. And I don't know that I'll really be interested in doing it when I'm done with the one I'm working on. But if I am, I'll call you and I'll let you know. And I found myself doing that for a couple of years. And eventually I did a portrait. It was a big, big portrait, multiple figures, with a very, very large paycheck attached to it. And I remember just getting the down payment and looking at it and thinking, wow, I'm a portrait painter. Like, I don't even know when that happened. I'd been telling people for years. I had 30 or 40 portraits lined up in a queue, and I'm still telling people that I'm not a portrait painter, and I'll put their painting in the queue. And if I get there and I'm still interested in doing portraits, I'll take the job. And it just, it had become such a routine response for me that it never occurred to me that I had built a career in portraiture. It was really kind of funny. But I fell in love with doing it. And it was about meeting the people. The paintings are challenging, but it was also, the big thing was meeting the people. And I mean, I crossed paths and did paintings for people I would never have met them otherwise. Some famous actors, some very wealthy and powerful people. And I've crossed, they've expanded the world that I live in by having met them. That's a pretty powerful thing. I didn't need explosions and dragons in the paintings anymore because I found the people so interesting, and portraying them faithfully, bringing them to life and creating these heirlooms that would be in their family for generations was its own challenge. And I grew to enjoy it. And I've been doing it ever since. I've been doing it for 20 years. But about 10 years ago, I was a stay-at-home dad. So when my first daughter was born, I stayed home and I worked on weekends. I dialed back the amount of portrait work I was doing. just took the bigger pieces, and so that I wasn't traveling so much, I worked on the weekends basically. And so when my oldest one, when we were looking at getting her into school, and we're looking down the road and saying, I need to now make plans about what I'm going to do when my days are freed up again, I look back at kind of filling my schedule with portraits, but the amount of time that I would have been out of town to do that every year, and the days that I would have been out of town, I would have been gone most weekends. And I just didn't want to do that. I had enjoyed so much of the time that I'd spent with my kids while they were growing up. I would have missed it too much. And so I started looking at other options, and I decided to open up a school. Because of where I come from, because I grew up with such limited financial means and such limited access to everything, art made it possible for me to have a very different life than I was born into. The life that I have has been incredible. And I've been able to do so much for my kids to make life easier for them than the life I had, to give them a head start that I didn't have. And the idea of being able to possibly give that back to other people who might not have a pathway. They have the desire, they're willing to do the work, but they just can't seem to find a pathway to getting the skills they need to build this kind of a life for themselves, to have access to being able to make art for a living. I feel like it was my responsibility to share what I'd learned. And so I opened up a school, and the school it's just continued to grow and grow along the way. The school's just a little bit over 10 years old now. We celebrated our 10-year anniversary in September of 2019. And the school, like I said, every couple of years we have to move into a bigger space. And we just have such a wonderful group of people that come in, and from all walks of life. I mean, from 7 years old all the way up to 70, 80 years old, people who are interested in careers and people who just want to paint for fun. I have a whole bunch of grandparents that come in and they want to learn how to do portraits so that they can paint their grandkids. I mean, you couldn't find a more noble reason to learn. And so I'm able to open up the doors for them. They have to do the work, but I'm able to put a path in front of them that makes it possible. And what I found is, because for the most part, I've figured these things out for myself, I found a simpler way of explaining it. It doesn't line up with the traditional approach to the education. Some of it, if you professionals will look at it, because I've got a lot of friends that are pros, and they look at it and like, it's such a strange way to teach it, but it makes sense. When you know how it works and you look at it, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I could see that. It's weird, it's kind of backwards, but it's a very short path to an extremely, to a very high level of proficiency in a very short time. I mean, and again, if you see what we do in the program, like the results that we get are just incredible. I mean, even the little kids, I post on our Facebook page, I post some of our 10 and 11-year-olds producing stuff that most college students would be envious of. And it's like, you take to these videos and it's like, how old are you? I'm 10, and they're holding their painting, and it's like, wow. And you can just imagine, what are they going to be doing when they're 15 or 16 years old? And it's just such a pleasure to be there. And the program has developed every year. The students show me where my explanations and my approach are lacking. And I don't have an ego about it. Every time that a student shows me where something, and they don't come to me and say, hey, you missed something. I see that I have a good percentage of students who are struggling in a particular place in the program. And I go back and I rethink it. Because my take on being a teacher is that as long as a student puts in an honest or really puts forth an effort, they are not capable of failing. Only the teacher is capable of failing, right? Because the teacher's job is to figure out how to make sense of it so the student who's doing the work can achieve the goal, right? And so if a student comes in and they do what I tell them, and they work hard, and they don't cut corners, and they're patient with themselves, if they fail, the failure is not theirs, it's mine, because clearly I didn't explain it in a way that was clear enough for it to make sense to them. And so because I have that attitude, my program has never, it changes all the time. Not drastically, but I find ways of taking a piece of information and breaking it into two so they're more easily digested. And sometimes those two then become two, each one of those gets broken into two smaller pieces. So not only has the program in the school evolved over time, but even the online program evolved. And that's actually why we named it Evolve, because it's an evolution not just for the students, but it's a program that's is constantly growing and evolving. And it's growing and evolving based on what we see from the students. The students are educating us in how to better educate them. It's a wonderful cycle. And so it's not like I'm getting like these epiphanies while I'm laying in bed. I'm watching the students and they're teaching me how to be a better teacher. It's such a cool thing. But just to give you an idea, so the program is laid out in blocks. I've gone back and I've reworked the first block in the program something like 13 times in 3 years. And we thought we had it down solid the first time. But the students have shown us where we were falling short as educators. And we've been able to really kind of dial in and tighten it up. And the program's not done. If it has to be reworked 100 more times in my lifetime, that's what it'll be. It'll be what it is. And again, when we say rework it, it's not like we're completely overhauling the program. They're little tweaks. So we create patches, videos that will explain this new idea. And then once we have a couple of them, we go back and we would just redo a new video with all of those patches in them. But the idea is that we're not creating a program for talented people as you would think of them. We're creating a program that is accessible for anybody willing to do the work to achieve professional level skill and understanding.
Right. And I love that because I know that you believe that art is a language. So it's great that you take, the words or the communication that you're receiving back from the results of each lesson from the students to tweak it to make it better for future students.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a congressman here in the US maybe 20 years ago. And I talk about him every once in a while in this context. His name is William F. Buckley Jr. And this is a time when politics people weren't so angry. But he had a TV show called The Firing Line, and they would have 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and they would debate a point, and it would be a real debate. It would be conversation from both sides of the argument as to how to resolve current issues that were, coming up for vote. His command, William F. Buckley Jr. ran the show, and so he was separate of the 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And his command of the English language was just incredible. For many years, he produced a calendar, a 365-page calendar of 365 words every human being should have in the vocabulary or something like that. And none of them had less than 7 syllables. I mean, it was ridiculous. But when he spoke, his vocabulary was that broad. He had a functional vocabulary that was just insane. And so he would start to speak like when he would address something, he would begin to speak and he would start using language that was kind of baseline that anybody would understand. And within a minute or so, he was using words that you could listen to 2 or 3 sentences and maybe not understand a single word that he said. And it's like, and the thing is, you could watch. It was entertaining. Like when I was young and I would see this, I found it entertaining to watch the other politicians. You could see it on their faces that they had no idea what he said. The problem was that language is for the purpose of communication, and he wasn't communicating anymore. As eloquent as he sounded, as impressive as he was using language to basically bully other people. Basically, he made them look ignorant. And I don't know that he did it intentionally. I don't know. But my point to it is so many teachers that teach art, these high level professionals, they are using language that people trying to learn don't understand. And so they're not communicating. They may be trying to, but they don't understand that they're not communicating because they're speaking above the student's head. And learning how to bring the language back down to a place where even someone who has no idea what you're talking about when you start understands the ideas when you're done. And like people find, like, I very rarely talk about art education using art as an example. I use cooking, and I use jogging, and I use boxing, and I use skydiving. I use things that people can make sense of without it being tethered to art, right? And so, if I can talk about like what we put into a painting is like spices that you would cook with, right? And so I can equate it to something that even if you only cook with salt and pepper, you understand that if you put in way too much salt, you can't take it out after you're done, right?
Yeah.
Anybody who's ever stood in front of an oven or a stove can do that. I try not to use art as a means for teaching art. Sometimes there are no choices, but in those places, I try to break it down into such small components that anybody could wrap their head around them. And when I can, I use things that aren't art related that are much more common experiences that almost anybody that's listening would say, hey, I understand that. Now I can see how it connects to art. And I think because it's very easy when you know what you're doing to forget that when you're using language and you start picking up the pace of what you're saying, that you're losing people because they don't understand the language. But if you talk about something like I don't know, I cook, but I don't know a lot about cooking. So when I talk about cooking, I'm talking in the most remedial terms. I'm speaking exactly the same language at the same level as anybody else who stands in front of a stove and cooks.
Right.
And so when I equate that to art, it's an easy connection. And I do that a lot. I do that a lot when I teach.
And I think one thing that's important for people to know about Evolve, especially when we're talking about communication, it's not just videos. It's not like they're just watching a video of you that was filmed, 6 months ago, and they got to take what they gained from that video and make something, and then that's it, move on to the next thing. When you do have that instance of losing somebody where they don't quite follow what you're saying, they go on and make the art, they can then have the opportunity to go back and fix it, or at least figure out where they went wrong, because you and other instructors are on call. You're on call to chat about what went wrong, where they went wrong, and where they can change and tweak moving forward.
Yeah, it's funny. All Evolve actually emerged from a podcast that I did with Mitch Bowler at Pencil Kings. In that podcast, I quite famously say in definitive terms that art cannot be taught through the internet. And I have been called out on that. I've had many people who are now students in the program. They've heard the podcast, and they actually email me and say, what changed? Like, it sounds like maybe you're just peddling something now to make money. And actually what changed is that Mitch came and looked at the program and said to me, like, we could digitize this. We could do it. It's not going to be making videos and throwing them out on the internet. There's got to be more to it. And Mitch is really the genius behind this, putting together the art school experience. And I hate to use the term art school, but an in-studio experience through the internet. And he's just done an incredible job of it. And he's put together a team of people who are just committed to creating a space where people can come in to the online program and always feel connected to the source of the material. And just to give a little bit of an overview of how that works is you enter the program and you get a video. And the video is me basically explaining how to do a thing. Step 1. All the materials that you need are shipped to you in a box. So you don't have to go to the store. Everything shows up in a box at your door, the brushes, the paint. So you don't have to do any of that. All you have to do is take out, the paint and the brush, take out the first piece of canvas, and then do what we showed you in the first exercise. You take a picture of it with your phone and drop it into our app, and it comes back to us, and then we check it for you. So it's a correspondence school. Every single assignment you do is actually checked by somebody who knows the program inside and out because they've been through the program. The people who check the homework are my students from the school. And I'm not talking about the little ones. I'm talking about my heavy hitters. So they know the program inside and out, and you're getting their expertise. But the program is designed so there's actually a report card. I can tell you that if you do a piece of art, that if it were a score like a math test, it's a 93 or it's an 84. And I can tell you exactly why, because the report card is calculated by category and numbers are assessed for each category. So you could do You could have a painting that looks like it's a mess. And this is actually why we put the report card together. People will say, oh, my painting's a total ruin. But actually, 85% of what's in the painting is exactly right. But there are a couple of things that aren't, and they kind of pull the painting apart and make it look like it's much worse than it is. And it's so easy when you get to a place where something it's just not coming together, that you lose track of the things you've done right. They have this idea that if you walk into an auditorium and there are 5,000 acoustic tiles in the ceiling and one is missing, you don't see the 4,999 tiles that are right. You only see the one that's wrong. And unless you have somebody who can point out to you how many tiles are there that are in place doing what they're supposed to do, unless you have someone to do that, you're only going to focus on the things that don't work. And you might not even realize how close you are to being where you want to be. And so we have the instructor. So every single thing you do in the program is a homework assignment, for lack of a better term. So every single assignment is sent in and it's viewed, it's looked over, it's scored to show you where your strengths and weaknesses are so we can focus on the weaknesses. But it's one video after another that explains these concepts, and they're all very simple. There are no big jumps. Everything is very basic. But so again, you think in terms of fundamentals. The Sistine Chapel is built with nothing but fundamentals. Make no mistake. There are no advanced techniques. There's only more experience. The number of things you need to know to be able to make extraordinary art is very small if that information fits in the palm of your hand, if it's given to you in a concise manner. Everything beyond that is a nuance of how you manipulate that understanding. And so that understanding, that ability to manipulate it and get those subtle things, is the hours you spend in front of the easel, committed to your craft. But the knowledge isn't that broad. But anyway, getting back to like how this works. So you do your homework, you send it in. In addition to that interaction, which you have on every single assignment, so you are interacting with somebody who knows the program inside and out, every single painting that you do. In addition to that, I have office hours. All of the instructors have office hours. Anybody can jump on the calendar, put their name in, and they can sit down and have a one-on-one private conversation with one of the instructors that they're dealing with at any time, right? Which is, there's not another program that does this. Additionally, we have live chats where me or some of the other instructors will go out and we'll do a lecture on a topic. Then we'll take on-topic questions and off-topic questions. And it's open to anyone in the program. And anyone can chime in and ask questions. And then in addition to that, we also have chat rooms where our students get together and they do their homework together. All they do is they jump on Facebook. They say, hey, I'm going to be in the homework room in an hour. And they'll go on. And when they start working, they just turn their phone on and they video, right? They run live video through that chat room, and other people jump in and join them. So they have company. And they'll be at different places in the program. It's not like everybody who's in block one is in a room. You have people who have been in the program for 3 years and other people who have been in the program for 3 weeks. And they're all there just kind of hanging out and talking. And people who have been around longer can help people who have been there for less time. They can give them insights. And we have a group. They do what they call midnight tea. And so it was a couple of people here on the East Coast in the U.S. They did like 11 p.m. So at night until 1 o'clock in the morning. And there were maybe 3 of them or 4 of them, one from Hong Kong, 2 in Australia, that jumped into the room. It was noon over there. And so we had this international group of students hanging out together, doing their homework. And this is another thing, like Evolve, it's everywhere. We're in 37 countries. We're all over the world. It's nice, but it breaks down barriers, and there's always a sense of community. And we're always trying to find ways to make the online program feel more like what it is to walk into the school, into the actual brick and mortar school where I teach. That's the goal of what we're doing with the community that we're building. And, we're constantly building on that. Like everything else, that's evolving all the time as well. But the idea is to create an experience where you always feel the presence of your instructor, that you never feel alone, right? Because, doing this stuff in the privacy of your own home and not being sure about stuff, it's easy to get deterred if something's not working. But if you know that in another 2 hours, you'll have some interaction with somebody who has the answers that you don't seem to have, or you could stop right now and reach out and somebody will come get back to you right away and answer questions and make you feel more comfortable about what you're doing, or maybe get you back on track because you're not sure. You watched a video and you didn't understand, right? And so there's always somebody there to help. And again, it's not 24 hours a day, 7 days a week where you snap your fingers and there's a person. But you drop us an email, somebody will get back to you very quickly. Those chat rooms, the people are in them all the time. And the likelihood of somebody being in there, if you're struggling, you're probably struggling at the very beginning of the program, though we don't even see that. It's not like what we run into is people have expectations of doing things perfectly at the beginning, which is unreasonable. I mean, I would even argue that those expectations they border on arrogance. Because why would you expect to be able to do something perfectly that you've never done before? Right. You wouldn't go in to do neurosurgery on somebody with no experience and expect to be able to not kill the person, right? So right. Why would you expect to be able to produce a flawless piece of art or just a flawless exercise on your first run? Why would you put that kind of pressure on yourself? And so for us, like as an example of the way this program grows, we have 20 exercises in block 1. If you're an absolute disaster in the first exercise, I mean an absolute train wreck, you get 0 points, which is, I would argue, is impossible. But let's say you're an absolute 0 on your report card in the first exercise. I mean, all that's missing is a couple of dead bodies. All you need to do in the second exercise to be on track is to get 5% better. Right? So 5% is nothing. Like, it's just a little bit of caring, nothing more. Let's say your second exercise you deliver is only 5%. You get a 5% grade. I've never seen anything below like a 55 or a 60. And even those one could argue are what most people would think are an absolute disaster that could not be recovered from. 55, 60, somewhere in there. But let's say you're at 5%. If you can grow 5% over each homework assignment, by the time you finish block 1, you will be flawless. 100%. At only a 5% growth, assuming you started at 0. If you're starting at 50%, which is what I would argue is a real disaster, you're only talking about a 2.5% increase in the quality of what you do over each piece. 2.5% is nothing. And if you do that at the 20th piece, you're flawless. Not good. You're absolutely perfect. And then you step into block 2 and the cycle starts over. You can be a mess at the beginning, but if you get those incremental growths over each exercise, by the time you finish the block, you will be flawless. You do that in each block. By the time you finish block 4, you will be producing professional level work. Not nice work, professional level artwork. And the idea is that, people put too much pressure on themselves at the beginning. They have an expectation instead of just kind of going along and letting us tell them, let us judge, let us tell you what you need to do to get where we want you to be. That's what we do. That's our job. And knowing that you can trust the people running the program to get you where you're going, as long as you're putting in the work, that takes a lot of pressure off. Like if I bear the responsibility for your education, all you have to do is show up and work. It takes the pressure away. It makes it easier.
I talked to Mitch about this too, about like, I just make it clear here. Like, you don't need any experience whatsoever. Right. And he said, yes. And I believe that, but so many people I think that would be coming into Evolve or interested in it already have that base layer. They've already put in some work and perhaps they're frustrated that for whatever reason they can't. They're dissatisfied with their work. They're dissatisfied with their skill set. Maybe they're putting in that 85% that you're talking about. And they don't know what they're doing wrong. And that's where the value of having eyes on your work, experienced eyes on your work to show you those tweaks. I remember when I was a kid playing Little League Baseball, there's this kid on my team that was the worst hitter. He was literally the worst. He always, if he ever made contact with the ball, which was like never, he grounded out. And his dad, over one weekend, just made 2 small tweaks. I think he made him move his leg over a little bit, and he moved his like back arm up a little bit. And the next practice, every single pitch was a fly ball to the outfield, whether it was a hit or not. He was just hitting it consistently. And it's the value of those small tweaks and having the experienced eyes to show you that, yeah, like you might be dissatisfied in your work, but you already are up at the plate. You know, you know how to swing the bat. It's just these little tweaks that we can make to make it so that, like you said, you're flawless.
Yeah. And look, I mean, and it always comes down to the same thing. Like, you know, that kid just required a little bit of understanding. Like, now the understanding came from the father. The father could see the issues and kind of move the thing around. But with the way that we do the education, we have three moving parts, right? So you think about the average person, when they sit down to make art, they look at the subject matter and then they try to, we'll talk about just realism, but the Evolve program covers everything from abstraction all the way to hyperrealism, from the standpoint of the value of the education. But from the standpoint of realism, people will look at a subject and then try to paint what they see. But there's no filter. There's nothing to make sense of it other than trying to understand the subject. And then what happens is that every subject that you paint, so you paint a person, you're a novice when you paint them because you've never painted them before. And then if you paint another person, you're a novice when you paint them because you've never painted them before. And the reason that you stay a novice forever is because you're always painting a new subject that you've never seen. The idea behind Evolve, and I would argue that every skilled artist works this way. You just don't know it because you don't hear the language. They have filters that they run the information through. They look at something and then they kind of take that thing. So like a portrait, they scoop up the information and they pour it through filters. And those filters are how they break down the subject. For Evolve, we have three filters: values, colors, and edges. And I can promise you that no matter how simple or complex a subject, there are no other moving parts. And I can all but guarantee that the people who are listening to this have never thought to filter something through those three things specifically. Like, you wouldn't even realize that that's all there is. To give you an example, so a ball on a table, if it's lit from one side, the ball has a lit side and a shadowed side. On the table, you have a light on the table, and they have the ball blocking light, casting a shadow. So you would have two shadows, one on the ball and one on the table, and two lights, one on the ball, one on the table. If you think about, and in grayscale, we would be thinking about the shadows and the lights. The shadows are one subject, the lights are another. If we then move that over and did a portrait of a live person, if we just thought of the person as a shadowed side and a lit side, we're now just painting shadows and lights. The shape of the shadow is more complex on the portrait, but it's the same subject because we're painting shadows. I'm not painting a face. I'm painting a shadow. And so what happens is if you have those filters in place, that you're painting a shadow of a certain color and a light of a certain color, and then the edge where they meet, it's either sharp or a gradient. If those are the filters you're using, a ball and a portrait are the same subject. The complexity of the portrait is neutralized by the filters that you're viewing it through. And that's the key. That's why people who paint portraits from life are able to do it. Not because they can paint an eye and a nose. And in fact, I went to a portrait demo one time, done by Nelson Shanks. Nelson Shanks, he passed away, I guess about a year or so ago. He was widely considered the preeminent portrait painter in the world. $300,000 per figure to have him paint your face. Okay? I mean, he painted Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Margaret Thatcher, Princess Diana. I mean, you name it, he painted them. The Pope. This is the guy, right? If you want to talk about portrait painters, this is the guy. And during the lecture, somebody asked him what he found hardest about painting portraits. And he said, I don't paint portraits. They're too difficult. I paint colors. I see how the colors play against each other, and I connect them with a proper type of edge. I look at the shapes of things. But at no point do I ever paint a portrait because it's beyond me. But if I get all of the colors and the shapes and the edges right, the portrait emerges from the decisions. But I don't paint portraits because I'm not that good. Nobody is. Now, I'm kind of paraphrasing, but you get the idea that even the number one portrait painter in the world doesn't tackle a face as a face. He's looking at the value and the color and then of one thing, and the value and the color of another thing, and then the kind of edge that connects them. And if he gets all of the value color decisions right and connects them with the right types of edges, the realistic portrait emerges from those decisions. That's filtering the data. You can't paint a portrait, but you can see the shape of a light, and the shape of a shadow is an abstract. And you can make decisions about what color and what value they are and put them down as abstract shapes and then work into them, connect them to the thing next to it with a type of edge that's appropriate based on what you see. But the thing is, you're looking for the edge. You're not looking for the forehead. You're looking for a shadow and a light and then the edge that connects them. And it simplifies the process. And the beautiful thing about it is you don't have to be an expert to do it. Anybody who understands how it works can do it. It's like a magic trick. Yeah, it looks like magic until you see it from behind, from the view of the magician. And you're like, well, that's not that hard. Now, it might take a little bit of practice to be able to do it so somebody watching you do it doesn't see the trick. They don't see how you do it, they only see the magic. But the idea is that the professionals, they're doing magic tricks, or at least it looks like magic from the side of the viewer. But the truth is, if you understood how they were breaking it down, you could do it too. And of course, you're not going to do a realistic portrait the first day you paint. You have to develop the skill. You have to develop the ability to see past the complexity of the subject and view it through the filters. And that's what a program like Evolve does. It takes you step by step. Like, we have portraits in our program, full-blown portraits, and they come up pretty fast. And by the time people get to them, people who have never painted a face in their life, who are terrified to paint a face, they knock this stuff out. They do an incredible job. And that's even with all the fear and all of the apprehension that they're going to fail. And they're still able to do it. And every time you win, you get a success. It makes you bolder for the next one. Gives you ideas about how to be better using the same tools.
Right. I think what you just highlighted gets into the mentality or some of the resistances that we like to talk about on this podcast that hold people back from starting. Like you said, they're terrified to paint a portrait, but when you can look at it kind of from that lens of, okay, it's a portrait, but it's made up of all of these small decisions that we're going to teach you how to do. It's kind of like your story that you're telling in the beginning of just kind of how you got to the point you are. And I think there's a lot of moments in your story, when, doing the Rolling Stones, or having that moment where I want to do science fiction cover illustrations and all these moments that somebody who doesn't have the skills yet, they can use that to hold them back because they're so excited about having this career to become a professional artist and to make money from it, but they don't even have the skills in line yet, and they're thinking about all these different paths that they can go down. But it's like you have to have the skills in place first. You have to have that kind of professional education there to be able to do the thing, and then you can kind of see where life takes you. You can never really plan what path you're going to go down, just like you didn't, but you have to actually get your house in order, so to speak.
Yeah, and what I would say to that, because one of the hardest things is how do you, when you don't know what it is you don't know, right? As you're an artist and you're fumbling around and you can't seem to get where you want to be, how do you recognize the place where you're going to get the education that's going to change that for you, right? Because we don't know what we don't know. And so, look, Evolve is not the only education out there. You've got colleges, you've got ateliers, you've got YouTube videos, you've got all of these things, and some of them are very expensive and some of them are free. And you have a range in between. So, most people, they find it safest to either go to the university, where they pay a staggering amount of money because, well, it's a place where we would traditionally go to learn. So if I go there, I'll learn. And then you have the other end of it where people say, there's no way I'm going to commit that kind of money. So the other option is I'll go for free videos. And I could talk just very briefly about those two options and why I would say that they're both probably very bad options.
Please.
The universities are, and I get into this all the time, and I don't mean to demean colleges that teach art. They are part of the same system that creates the problem, but it's the banks and it's the government and it's the schools and it's the teachers and it's the students. It's everybody working together to create the problem. So basically, you take a school. Let's say we're talking about a school like Pratt, and I'm not picking on Pratt. We'll take a school like Pratt, which is widely considered one of the best schools in the world, has been forever. Of course, it floats up and down the top 10 list, but it's always in the top 10. They can only have a program as good as their teachers. So if they have some really good people teaching, they've got a really good program. And if those teachers move or they get busy with their own work and then don't come back on the next year, the program's diminished for it. But they can't control that. And it's not like if they have a year where they've got mediocre teachers, they're not going to run a painting program. They have a responsibility. People are coming to the school to learn. So some years you might get good teachers and some years you might get bad teachers. The school can't do anything about it. All they can do is try to get the best teachers they can. And that's a problem in and of itself. So like the high-end schools like Pratt, they boast that their entire staff of teachers are working pros. But you kind of dig into that and you'll find out that the vast majority of the people that are teaching in the school are not what you would think of as a pro. They're people who have made money, so by definition, you've made some money at it, you are a professional. But they're not full-time pros. They're teaching at the school in large part because they need to supplement their income because the art that they make doesn't give them enough income to live off of. So they teach to supplement. So when they teach, what they're teaching is a skill set that doesn't rise to the level of making a living. So they are already setting the next generation of students behind. Because what they're using doesn't pay their bills. How are they going to be able to generate a student who's better than them with what they're teaching? Right? I mean, that's a problem. And we're talking about the top schools that hire the pros. Now, imagine a teacher who doesn't make a living at all, doesn't even come close, but they've had some professional jobs, and a school, because they say they hire only professionals and they couldn't get anyone serious in this round, grabs a handful of those guys that they couldn't make a living if they had to in the art world. What are they teaching? And what does a student who gets that teacher as a freshman take into their second year of school? Their foundations are ruined. How do they recover? Beyond that, and these are kind of two tracks, as you start getting into schools that don't have professional teachers, what you have teaching are people who went to a school and got an education in art and couldn't make a dime in art. And so what did they do? They need to be able to survive, so they become art teachers. They are now selling something that didn't do anything for them. They have no skills to offer, but they're basically giving back what they got. And is a teacher going to remember everything that they know? No, there aren't enough hours in a class. So they're only teaching a portion of what they know that doesn't work. See, every generation winds up weaker and weaker, and those weaker people then become teachers, making it even worse, generation after generation. On the other side of it, even in the schools where you have good staff, learning to make art is a language. And so imagine, let's even take it and look at it in from another type of art. You want to become an incredible musician. Let's say you want to be able to play piano. And the first semester of college, you're taking class with somebody who teaches you drums. The second semester, you get somebody who teaches piano, and it's great. Your second year, you're now in a class with a violin teacher. And right, every single teacher is different, and they're teaching you all these different things, but they're not all moving you in the direction of piano. They all have different languages with which they work. So like in the Evolve program, we have a very specific language that we work with. And you have to start at the beginning because we have to teach you our alphabet, right? So we'll kind of bring this back around to like a language. So think of it as poetry being beautiful finished art. In order to create poetry, you can't just be taught poetry. You have to be taught an alphabet. From that alphabet come words. Words become vocabulary. Vocabulary leads to grammar. Grammar to being able to write. Being able to write to being able to write poetry. Right? You can't make poetry if you don't know the language. And you can't have 4 or 5 different languages scrambled together to give you the ability to write poetry. Imagine if you were learning German and French and Japanese and English, and you were trying to put all of those different ideas together to create a poetry that's a mix of all of them. No, you're not communicating. Nobody would understand. How do you piece that together? And if you have one teacher in your freshman year teaching painting, and in your second year, a different teacher who uses a different language and a different approach, and in your third year, someone else, that's exactly what you're doing. Your education's nothing but scrambled eggs. And you can't unscramble an egg. An education in art has to be linear. And so when you're looking for an education, for everybody listening, when you're looking for a place that is going to offer you a sound education in art, you need to have a linear thought process. You need to see at the very beginning that there's an alphabet, something so simple that it looks like an alphabet, that it looks so remedial it would almost bore the hell out of you, right? And when you see that, then you want to look at the other end of the program and see if the quality of the end result is where you want to be. Is it professional in nature? Because if they have the alphabet at the beginning and they have the poetry at the end, you can bet the vocabulary and the grammar and the spelling is all there in between. What you'll find is if you jump onto YouTube, it's nothing but poetry. Where's the alphabet? How can you possibly learn to write poetry by watching somebody who's only teaching you poetry? I've kind of described the way that I see these videos, like these YouTube videos, and I call them theater. So imagine if you didn't have an alphabet, you didn't read, you couldn't write, and we'll say just in English, and somebody got up on stage and started to read Shakespeare, right? And they just do it beautifully. And you stand there in the audience and you watch them do it and you're like, wow, that's amazing. And it doesn't look hard, right? They're just reading and they're speaking beautifully. And it doesn't look difficult, but if you go home and try to do it, you look down in the book, you can't read the words because you don't speak the language. You don't read the language. You don't know the alphabet. And if you stand there in the crowd listening to this person speak and you raise your hand and he stops and you say, wow, that's amazing. How are you doing what you're doing? And they say, well, I'm looking at the words and I'm reading them and I'm enunciating and I'm resonating with my voice. And I'm just, okay, that doesn't help. That's not an education. But that's what these videos pass for. They are theater. If there's no alphabet at the beginning, it's not an education. And look, I'm in the process right now. Like right now, we're in the COVID-19 thing, which will kind of date this podcast. And I have a major portrait commission that I'm working on. It's a large scale portrait, and I'm doing it and I'm live streaming it. And every single day, I make the point of telling everybody watching, this is not an education. It's just not. You can't fathom all the things that I'm thinking with every mixture and every stroke I put down. I can't explain them. There's just too much going on in my head. Because what you're seeing is a little bit of knowledge and 30 years of experience. I can't teach you the experience. I can only teach you the knowledge. But the knowledge at this level is buried so deep under the experience that all you see on the surface of my work is experience. And I am trying really hard to explain things, and I'm spending more than half of my time actually speaking and not painting, trying to break things down and make sense of it for the people as they ask questions in the live chat. But the truth is, for all of my answers, without the alphabet at the beginning, this is nothing really but theater. And even from me in this live video, which is going to be like 60 hours of video, every brushstroke, it's theater without the knowledge as an underpinning. And so when you go and you're looking for an education, whether it's in a university or on YouTube for free or a program in between like Evolve, or even going to an atelier, you want to find a program that has a distinct beginning point that makes it seamless or frictionless to enter in, where you don't look at it and go, the first thing I'd have to do requires greater skill than I have. So as an example, in Evolve, the first thing you do is you learn how to hold a brush. That sounds insane. How could you not know how to hold a brush? But you know what? I want to make sure that when you pick up the brush, you're not questioning what you're doing, that you know it's been shown to you. And the next exercise, or the next thing we do, is we show you 3 ways of using that brush to put paint from the palette to the canvas. Not 5 ways, 3 ways, and 3 ways only. And those 3 ways, if you do just those, you'll be able to paint anything you want to paint. So why would we muddy the waters with 20 options? Just 3. We use 4 shades of gray. Now, a typical grayscale palette for an artist is 11 shades, but that's confusing. Why use 11 when you can use 4 and make better sense of it? Yeah, once you know what you're doing, if you want to use 11 shades, knock yourself out. But I'd argue they're not needed. You look at the quality of the work in the program, you would probably come to that same conclusion, that 11 shades aren't needed, so why does everyone use them? They're overkill, and what it is that everyone uses them because that's what everybody did before them. That's how they were taught. And they were taught that way by somebody who had been taught that way, going all the way back to the 1400s. Well, we have new tools today. We have pictures, and we have video. We have all these things that the old masters didn't have, where these fundamentals, what we think of as fundamentals, were developed. But why have 11 shades when you could have 4? It just confuses. Why have an infinite number of ways and let people randomly apply paint to a canvas when you can show them exactly how to do it to get a specific result? And then they can control the result from there. But when you're learning, you want to get a single line of thought. You want to get one idea for how to think through everything so that you have a solid vantage point. Then go and expand your horizons by looking at how other people work. At that point, free YouTube videos are worth their weight in gold. But until you have your feet underneath you and you understand, you have a solid idea about how things work, I recommend staying away from multiple approaches. All they do is confuse. They pull you in different directions. And even 2 artists using the same language may not mean the same thing. And so you want to, again, for your own benefit, look for a program that has a single line of thought, a single voice, and has an alphabet at the beginning and an end result that aligns with your goals. And if you do that, you'll probably get where you want to be in a very short order.
Right.
Well, that was a really long rant, but
No, I love it. Yeah, and I know in your story you said how you basically burned the ship. And yes, the great thing about Evolve is that it offers the ability to, I mean, if you want to burn the ship, you can, and you can just get the lessons done as quickly as possible, but also you don't have to burn the ship. You can take it at a slower pace. Mitch was saying like an hour a day that will get you through the program within a year. And also you're not burning your wallet by going to or should I say your wallet for the next 20 or 30 years of student loan debt for going to an expensive school, like you said, that doesn't have that continuity of purpose of the same structure in place. So there's just you have so many things going for you. Like I said, you already mentioned the community, also the materials, but the method I think is the number one thing of getting people from amateur to professional in just a year or less. It's an amazing accomplishment that you've made.
Yeah, with that, it's actually really important. So the way the program works, people can work at their own pace. We have calculated, based on average student progress, that it takes 350 hours to go from the first exercise to the end of block 4, which is professional level illustration skills. And our website actually has every single painting shown in the program. So you can actually go out to the website and look through the website and see exactly what you're going to learn and see how it progresses. But we also have, and I can say, I love to point this out, every single painting in those carousels, and we're talking about like 150 paintings, they're all done by students. Every one of them, as gorgeous as they are all done by students. It shows what the potential is. It's not like I did the paintings and I'm saying you could do the same. These are our students, teenagers for the most part. Now, that being said, we have another thing which I can promise you nobody else would offer. We have a calculator on the website that if you put in the number of hours a week that you'll work, We can tell you exactly where you'll be at what point in the number of weeks. So you can say, I'll work 7 hours a week. Where would I be in 32 weeks? And it'll show you exactly which homework assignment you'll be working on. And if you decide that you want to clock 30 hours a week, where will I be in 3 months? It'll show you exactly where you will be. But I can tell you that 350 hours brings you from knowing nothing to being all the way to the end of block 4, which is, again, when you go out and you look at the stuff on the website, it is professional level work. And I mean, I'm not talking about just kind of the very bottom of the professional end of the scale. I'm talking about you will be able to produce stuff that will leave anyone that you know slack-jawed looking at it. You go out to the website, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But the point of this is, like, if you go to a college, a typical painting class is 6 hours. They're probably going to give you another 6 hours in homework. You'd be clocking 12 hours a week just on your painting class. If you do that in the Evolve program, you'll go from nothing to professional level work in about 6 months.
Wow.
And you'll do it for $1 penny on the dollar of what a college education would cost. Literally 1 penny, not 3 pennies, 1 penny, plus, even go further than that, all of the materials are free. Everything. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about plastic palette knives and low-grade student-level paint. This is Old Holland paint, handmade brushes, top of the line, the kind of material any professional would be giddy to be working with. Shows up free. The cost of the material is actually about half the price of the program. So a $2,000 program is actually only about $1,000 in education. The rest of it is material costs, which we send to your door, right? So, I mean, it's like, you know, when you start looking at these things, we broke it down, and it breaks down to something like the education's like $3 an hour for a world-class education. But the beauty is that if you wanted to turn this program around overnight, you burn a candle at both ends. You put in 35 hours a week, right? Really commit the time and do it right. You can't just rush through it. But if you do it right at 35 hours a week, less than a full-time job, 35 hours a week, in 2.5 months, you'll go from knowing nothing to working at a professional level. There's not another program in the world that even comes close to making a claim like that. And on top of that, if you do block 1, you have to do the whole block and submit every homework assignment. If you feel that we oversold the program, we'll refund every single penny that you've given us, and you'll keep the materials that you have. Again, there's not another program in the world that would make either of those claims. I've been doing this for 10 years. I know what the program yields. The Evolve program's been running now for 3 years. We know what we're offering. And it's just a matter of getting people to believe that they can achieve these same things. With so many people who they fear that they'll be the person that the program can't help. And we've yet to find that person. You just got to show up and do the work the way it's put in front of you. You'll get the result.
I love it. Kevin, you got me shivering. So excited about this. So.
You know what? I love what I do.
Yeah.
And, you know, like I said earlier, art has given me a life that I didn't even know it could exist from where I came from. And the idea of being able to share that and maybe make it possible for somebody else to enjoy the same kind of a life where they get to create and they get to make their own schedule and not starve. The idea of that, to me, I mean, it's a responsibility for me, and I take it seriously. And it's funny, like, again, you get all these things like, again, oh, we're going to send you really great material. The expectation is you're going to get like cheap paint and you know, bad brushes and plastic tools.
Old Holland is pretty
expensive. Old Holland is the top brand of paint in the world. Just to frame the significance of Old Holland celebrated their 102nd birthday the same year that Napoleon was born. Yeah, how's that for a company that's been around a while? Yeah. Okay, they were 100 years old when Napoleon was born. They've been making the same paint 350 years. The next oldest paint company, I think, is only 200 years old. It's almost just a little bit more than half their age. Old Holland is incredible, and I don't think anybody with any sense would debate the quality of the material.
Just got to know how to use them.
Yeah, and it's just a matter of knowing how to use the stuff. But I believe very strongly that, you know, when you learn with cheap materials, the materials get in your way. right? If you're having problems when you're painting with this, you know that it's not the paint. You know it's you. But if you're using cheap materials, you could be doing everything right, and the materials are screwing you up. They're just not delivering on your work. And so the idea that you use cheap materials when you don't know anything is actually counterproductive. And it can hold you back from your potential. And it's not, and you could be putting in all the work, everything that you're contributing, you deserve the result, but the material just doesn't give it to you, and you think it's you, when it's actually the tools you're working with. This is why we're working with such high-grade material. And I can tell you that Evolve, Old Holland believes so strongly in the program that we have, they actually make our grayscale paint for us. It's not a product that exists in the real world. They have built out this paint line for us, at least the grayscales. They don't have to align themselves with anybody. They are the top of the food chain. Nobody even comes close. The fact that they stop production a couple of times a year to make grayscale paint specifically for Evolve sets the framework to give you an idea of what they think of Evolve.
Right. What happens when a student is used to their grayscale paints and they're done the program?
So people have an idea that like Old Holland is very expensive. If you just look at the cost of Old Holland and the cost of another brand, they look expensive, but you might only put out a 1 centimeter bead of Old Holland paint, but another brand that's half the price, you have to put out a 1.5 inch bead to get the same amount of actual pigment. So the Old Holland paint is comparable in the amount of actual paint and how far it will go across your canvas. The tube is a higher quality of product, so you're making more of a purchase up front. But I got to tell you, we give a lot of paint. If you go through all 8 blocks, you'll be up to your elbows in paint and brushes. There's a lot. We give out a lot of paint between the opaque paint and the glaze colors. I think we're giving out like 23 or 24 distinctly different colors. And you're getting these, 20 ml, but in some cases 40 ml tubes. They go a long way. The grayscale paint has 100 portions in it, even though you're only doing 20 paintings. That grayscale paint will last you forever. You can't buy it in stores, but you wouldn't be working with it. Once you get further down the road, you'd work in color. But, again, this is one of those things. Like once you've worked with Old Holland paint, everything else is dog food. I mean, it's, to be honest.
They spoil you.
Yeah, they really do. And the thing is, you wouldn't want to work with other paints, but you use up a color. So you buy one color, it's $20. You don't have to replace another tube for 2 months. Yeah, okay, you get another tube, it's $35, but you're not buying them all at one time. You buy one here and one there as you use them. And so you have enough paint in the program to not only do what we do in the program, but to do many, many paintings past that. Like I know that we have people who have finished Block 8, and they actually have entire sets of untouched tubes of paint. They've just never even got to them. The paint that we gave them from earlier blocks lasted them all the way through the entire program. They've got entire sets of paint that are worth $300 or $400, untouched, unopened, just sitting there. They can now go out. And if they've done 100 paintings in the program, they've got 100 tubes, 100 paintings worth of paint sitting there untouched that came free with the program. And again, depends on how much paint you put out, if you're wasteful or if you're really careful not to waste anything. Like everybody's going to find a different thing. But the bottom line is that once you get used to it, you'll fall in love with it. And it's going to be one of your best friends. You'll never want to work with anything else. And I mean, people will try other stuff, but you'll realize the truth of the statement. Everything else is literally dog food compared to Old Holland paint. It really is. And if you can work at no additional cost, if you can work with the finest material on the planet, why wouldn't you? I mean, why wouldn't you do it? It wouldn't make sense to go bottom feeding after that.
Right.
One last thing just before I jump. I know we've run way over.
No, you're good.
But one of the things that we run into, and I think which really makes our program so strong, is that like the access that people have when they come into the program. You jump into a program and you've got like a professional, and you can assume that you'll never actually get to speak to that guy. You jump in and you'll be dealing with all their underlings because the pro is out doing the important stuff. In this program, I am accessible. People call me. They call me at home. People text me, not email, text me because they have my phone number. I get on chats and talk to people individually. Because for me, opening this up, making it possible for people to succeed in art, that's the whole point of this program. We don't have 20,000 people because we wouldn't be able to offer the level of care. We limit the number of people we bring in. We control it, and we don't let the company grow beyond our ability to offer the highest level of care and attention. We never want a student sitting around for 2 days waiting to hear back. People have access to us. And then again, it's not like you snap your fingers and there I am. But if somebody along the line can't answer a question and they feel like I would be able to do the better job of answering your question, I'm the one you speak to. There's never a point where I am too busy. I'm always available for the students who need us and who need what I have to offer. And it distinguishes the program in a very big way. And I mention that because we have a student who just got into the program. He's an exceptional painter. He's hit walls and he can't get over them. And so he saw the program and jumped in. He's just finished block 1. And he was talking to me about how in all of the things we talk about in the program, all the advertising, the biggest thing that he's found is the value of the access. And he just said we understate how accessible the people in the program are, the people who run the program, how accessible we are to those in the program. So I just thought I'd put that out there because it is a really big deal. It makes all the difference, I think.
Oh, it's a huge deal. So yeah, like I said, like one of the big tenets of Evolve is the community, and not just being able to talk with you guys as you just described, to talk with you, Kevin, right now, but to talk to other community members, to have that kind of camaraderie and to have that feeling like you're not in it alone, that other people all around the world are doing it too. They're striving for the same goals that you are. I mean, that's the reason I started this podcast, to show that other people deal with resistances and other people have issues with their creative life and getting past their resistances. So it's such a breath of fresh air to hear that and to know that not just you are accessible, but everybody else that's going through it as well.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the challenges. Even the professionals struggle. And like I'm working on that big portrait I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. I am verbalizing the places where I'm struggling so that the people watching get a sense that it's not just a walk in the park. I'm working. I'm having to think. It doesn't all come easy. And so people are seeing me struggling with some stuff. Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm able to get through it and I'm able to pull it together. But a big part of that is just confidence. You get confidence by doing art. And the more you do, the better you get at it, the more confident you become. The more successes you stack, the more confident you become. So when you hit something that's challenging, it doesn't rattle you. But I'm letting the students see while I'm doing this live video, and people we've recorded it. People can jump on to Successful Artist Group and they can access it and see the whole thing. But there are places where I let people know, hey, I'm having a hard time here. I can't figure out what I'm doing. I need to dial it back and really kind of focus. We're all in the same circumstance. Even the pros struggle. How they deal with the struggle is different. People coming in have been painting for 6 months or a year or even 10 years that are not getting where they want to be. They're fighting the same fight as the pros. And I think it's a good thing for them to know that. They're connected to the same traditions, the same challenges that I have, that Michelangelo had. The challenges are the same. And they're part of that tradition. And to feel connected to it for all the ups and the downs and to know that every one of us has them, I think is a big thing.
Very cool. Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your story, for creating Evolve, and letting us in for an hour here to talk about Evolve and to see what it can bring to our lives. I appreciate that, man.
Well, absolutely my pleasure. And thank you again for having me.
No, thank you. Huge thank you to Kevin for coming on the show and sharing so much valuable information about Evolve. Kevin came through in so many ways. I don't really have too much to add, except for one stat that I want to reiterate. $3 an hour. $3 an hour to bring your skills from potentially nothing to professional grade art. The time and money aspect of art school is a huge factor that goes into many of your decisions, whether or not it's right for you. And Evolve destroys that decision, basically. It makes it a no-brainer. It's going to save you so much time. It's going to save you so much money. But the number one thing is the guarantee. Guaranteed results. Guaranteed that you're going to get to the level that you see on the website. The block 4 examples. The path is already set for you. All you have to do is walk it, and that has to be such a sigh of relief. And if you want to save even more money, you can save 10% by being a listener of Your Creative Push. Go to yourcreativepush.com/evolve. That is the only link that will get you to that 10% discount. There you'll see student examples, before and after photos, and much more information about the program, as well as a message from me. If you have more questions that you need answered, we have a webinar on June 2nd. Head to yourcreativepush.com/webinar. You can enter your email address and I will send you the link to that webinar on June 2nd. If you're listening to this after, no fear, still go to yourcreativepush.com/webinar. I will send you the replay of it or answer any of the other questions that you have. And on next week's episode, we finish up our 4-part Evolve series. I have a conversation with Michael Ray, who's a current student at Evolve, just finishing up his curriculum, and we talk about the experience of being an Evolve student, what he's seen in himself, and what he's seen in other students. If you want to see the incredible work that Michael is creating, you can head to his Instagram. He is Michael Ray Art, or we'll have that linked up at today's show notes page, along with everything else we talked about with Kevin at yourcreativepush.com/356. But that's all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done, and more importantly, to bring your skills to the next level, to the level that you never dreamed possible. I love you all so much, and remember that the universe needs your creations, and you are the universe. We'll see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to subscribe to YCP on your favorite podcast app. Or better yet, join the newsletter, where you'll get each week's episode, YouTube video, inspirational resources, and a sneak peek at the following week's guest, all in one weekly email. Again, that's yourcreativepush.com/subscribe.